On Saturday the 8th of April, bushranger Daniel Morgan rode past Ben Warby's dairy station and asked for directions. He then rode to Warby's home, where he was mistaken for Frank Gardner. Morgan stressed his true identity and even discussed how he was an old schoolmate of Warby. Morgan had breakfast, helped himself to some of the grapes growing in the garden, and procured a fresh horse before heading off, blissfully unaware that close behind him was Superintendent Winch's party. That afternoon, Ewan McPherson, proprietor of the Pichelba station, was settling in for a relaxing evening with his family after a big trip to Melbourne. They had dinner, and McPherson took up his favoured position on the sofa. His daughter played piano for the family and guests. As Ewan relaxed on the sofa, he noticed the silhouette of a man pass by the window of the homestead. He sent his son Gideon to answer the door, which the boy promptly did, only to be met with Daniel Morgan levelling a revolver at his head. The women screamed and bunched up at the far end of the room as Morgan entered. "I'm Morgan. I suppose you have heard of me?" the bushranger asked Ewan McPherson. McPherson answered in the affirmative. The kitchen staff had run in to see what the commotion was. One of the maids thought it was a joke and playfully slapped Morgan, much to his ire. "I am Morgan and will not allow you to play tricks with me," he rumbled, sending the girl back with the others. When offered food, Morgan refused, but brought in two men he had bailed up on the way to the station so that they could eat. The men were Robert Telford, the station's overseer, and two of the station hands. Morgan kept the door guarded and stated that all he wanted was a good horse to take him back to the piney range. As the night wound on, Morgan thirsted for whiskey and asked if there was any around. When it was found that the decanter was almost empty, Morgan allowed Alexandrina MacDonald to fetch more. MacDonald was no fool, and took the opportunity to notify a man named McIntosh, who was employed on the station, that Morgan was in the homestead. Back in the house, Alice Keenan, the McPherson's nurse, asked to attend a sick child in the nursery. Morgan begrudgingly allowed her to go. For a fierce and bloodthirsty murderer, he wasn't doing a very good job of keeping his prisoners under his control. As Keenan returned from the nursery, she bumped into Alexandrina MacDonald returning with whiskey for Morgan. Keenan also informed McIntosh of Morgan's presence, and he finally took the situation seriously. Alice Keenan was not about to let Morgan the murderer escape on her watch, and sent Tom O'Donnell the milkman to fetch George Rutherford, part owner of the station, and call for the police. As Keenan returned to the homestead, she bumped into Mrs. McPherson, who had also been allowed out to see the sick child. When she found out about Keenan's actions, she chastised the nurse. "You wretch, you have endangered our lives!" When Keenan explained that the opportunity to capture Morgan was one they could not allow to let slip, McPherson replied, "What is the capture of Morgan to the safety of my family?" The nurse was determined in spite of her mistress and went around rousing the staff in the outbuildings on her way to see Rutherford. In the house, Morgan, loosened up by the whiskey, began to speak freely. He told the McPhersons that he had not slept in 5 nights, but the next night he would be out of Victoria and he would sleep well. It was at this time he conducted one of the McPherson girls to play the piano for him, which she did for an hour. Morgan was soothed by the tunes like the proverbial savage beast. When Miss McPherson had to retire, the piano playing was taken over by Miss Rutherford. As she played, Morgan continued to ramble about anything and everything that came to mind, most of it self-pity. Ewan McPherson kept him talking, hoping it would stop him from doing anything dangerous. Morgan soon turned to an object of regular fixation, McGinnity's revolver. Of all the acts Morgan had committed, it seems that the murder of Sergeant McGinnity was the one that he ruminated on the most. As he spoke, one of the younger children took much delight in crawling under Morgan's chair and between his legs. After a midnight supper, the women and children were sent to bed. Meanwhile, news had reached Police Magistrate Shadforth at Wangaratta, and the police were mobilised. A party comprising Senior Constable Evans, Constable Leverton, Shadforth, and 7 armed volunteers headed off at 11 p.m. George Rutherford had gathered a group of workmen from the station to take up arms. Among these men was a wiry, square-chinned station hand named John Wendlin. At 2 a.m, the Wangaratta posse arrived at Pichelba station and silently took up positions around the homestead. On the morning of April 9th, 1865, storm clouds were dissipating over Pichelba station, and Morgan was feeling optimistic after a long sleepless night. He spent a considerable amount of time combing his hair and preening his beard. Like most Australian-born men of a certain age, he was proud of his tumbling gypsy locks. He wolfed down the breakfast that Alice Keenan served to him and the men. As he ate, Robert Telford pointed to Morgan's pistol, loaded and capped in hand as always, saying, "Man, you would not be such a bad fellow if you put that nasty thing away out of your hand." Morgan stopped eating long enough to look at Telford with dark, sad eyes and say, "That is the only friend that I've got." If Morgan had noticed the increased activity outside the homestead, he went out of his way to pretend otherwise. Perhaps he realised his doom was imminent. Perhaps he was glad to see the end. He arranged his revolvers in his belt and proceeded to the door and eternity. It was 8:15 in the morning when Morgan walked out with Ewan McPherson, his son Gideon, the two station hands and Robert Telford towards the stables, probably anticipating whatever fine filly or fleet-footed colt was awaiting to take him to blissful rest in the Piney Gap. McPherson noticed the men shifting around to get a good shot at Morgan, and as they reached the stockyard he stood aside from Morgan. The posse levelled their weapons at the bushranger, who was just reaching the gate when the crack from a rifle shattered the serenity. Morgan lurched forward as a bullet, fired by Wendland, tore into his spine through his shoulder and out through his throat. He hit the ground face first and was quickly disarmed. The dying bushranger was carried on a mattress to the woolshed. As he lay dying, he gurgled, "Why did they not give me a chance? Why did they not challenge me?" Dr. Dobbin was called for and arrived at midday. He asked Morgan if he was in great pain, but Morgan did not answer. The last thing Morgan said was, "I'm choking," whereupon he died at 2:15 in the afternoon. Morgan left no last will and testament, no deathbed confessions, no buried treasure, and no descendants. Soon his body was conveyed to Wangaratta in a wool bale, where it was posed for photographs and locks of hair cut off by souvenir hunters. Superintendent Cobham went a step further and had Morgan's beard flayed and pegged on a board to dry like a possum skin. The head was removed and a plaster cast was made by a surgeon in Melbourne. The casting and photographs of the cadaver are the only records we have of Morgan's true appearance. His headless corpse was buried in Wangaratta Cemetery, where it spent many years next to the public latrines. Yet as much as people tried to suppress memories of Morgan, his reputation as one of the bloodiest bushrangers has endured.